Welcome back to the Daily Mastermind. George Wright III with your daily dose of inspiration, motivation, and education. And I'll tell you what, I'm excited today. Jim Matuga is in the house, and he is the president of InnerAction Media, as well as a new author, or maybe another author, but this book that's coming out, Humble Influence, is one that caught my attention. So, Jim, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, George. Thanks for having me on, man.
Yeah, no, this is good. We got a chance to talk a little bit before the show, just some things that really stood out to me in my mind, and we'll go really heavy into that. But listen, if you're the first time listening to the podcast, you gotta remind yourself why I'm doing this. I do this because I've learned lessons over my life from some of the biggest thought leaders out there, but I'm trying to share strategies and tactics that can help you. And it's such a noisy marketplace that the reason Jim stood out to me, and we're going to get into his background here in a minute, is because he's kind of flipping the script on what you would typically think of with leadership. And I know most of you listening to this are leaders. You may be leaders in your own way, whether it's a CEO, business owner, or whatnot, or maybe in your home life or your friendships and relationships. But there's some really good strategies and tips that we're going to get into today. So I'm glad you're here with us. The point of the mastermind is we're all working together to create that best life. And Jim, what I would love to do, just for people that don't know you, and look, you're a marketer, an entrepreneur, a business owner, you got your own podcast, and now you have this amazing book coming out. But I think a lot of times people will see you as this leader, right? This great background. And I would love for you to fill in the gaps a little and just help people to understand where you came from, like who you are as a person before we jump into that. Would you mind kind of filling that in for us?
Yeah, absolutely. I graduated with a degree in journalism. So I'm a trained writer,
Nice.
but my specialty was in advertising from West Virginia University, WVU, the home of the Mountaineers. And I never left Morgantown. I'm a resident now here of Morgantown since 1988 and worked in the media business for all my life. When I graduated WVU with a degree in advertising, I wanted to be working on Madison Avenue, working on great ad campaigns for all the great brands. I wanted to be a copywriter, and I got into sales. And every time I took a promotion, every time I got a pay raise, it took me further and further from where I wanted to go. And then eventually, I wanted to have my own agency. And what I kept learning was that every time I got that security in my career path, it took me further and further away. And finally, in 2011, I started InnerAction Media, which is my own media marketing company. And so I've got a team of 15 on our team here in Morgantown. And we look at our business as a way to take our talents and abilities that have been ordained and blessed by our creator and go out into the marketplace and serve people. We represent great brands like WVU Medicine and West Virginia Lottery, and a lot of small and mid-sized companies and a lot of nonprofits. So that's what we do. The why is mixed in there a little bit too with business as ministry, so to speak. And that's the background. So I've learned a lot over those 30 some years, 38 years almost of my career. And that's what humble influence is. It's a culmination of all that wisdom and knowledge.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, I've been around enough authors over the years now to realize that's not a light lift. And so you chuckle, but I know you know what I'm talking about. So I wonder, what is it that made you feel so passionate about really, or inspired you to want to write the book Humble Influence?
Yes.
And everything associated with it, because you have a million things going on, but this message I think you feel pretty strongly about. So why this book? What inspired you to do it, and what's driving that right now?
Absolutely. Well, I've written 2 marketing books, and it seems like everybody's got a marketing book that's in our sphere, that does marketing. And those were like Amazon, Kindle, self-published books and everything. But this book was different because I attended a leadership conference, April 17th, 2007, 18 years ago, George. Believe it or not. And in that conference, it was a leadership conference put on by West Virginia University, and there was a couple hundred people in the room, and it was really neat. We heard from a keynote speaker, James Kouzes, who had written a great book, Leader's Legacy. And as I was sitting there, it was just on my heart that, like, why is all this energy, time, money spent on developing leaders, but I'm not really a leader yet. I want to be a leader, but none of this is really applying to me. I want to learn how to be a great follower. And so I went back to my home that night, and I said, I'm going to write a book on how to be a great follower. And that's the date that I, started the document, and it's lived on multiple computers over the years. And last year I decided I need to finish this thing. And I've been chipping away at it for 18 years, believe it or not.
Wow.
Anecdotes and little stories and notes and, wisdom that I picked up along the way in those 18 years. And I finally had an opportunity last fall to really complete the book and start shopping for publishers. And that's what I did.
I love it. So this is actually not something you just decided you saw a need in the marketplace. You've kind of lived it, and
Yeah.
it's interesting how you say this, because I talk a lot about leadership. We have a lot of great leaders on. You're a great leader, but I think one of the reasons that people think about leadership or try to train and become leaders is
Mm-hmm.
they believe that's how they're going to get the most influence, and it's sort
Mm.
of a thing they're chasing, that they know they need that badge of leadership, that title of leadership to have influence.
Mm-hmm.
And you've really kind of flipped the script on that by
Yes.
saying, and you just said it, being a follower. So
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of people hear the word follower and they're thinking, social media and things like,
Yeah.
like, I don't know how
Yeah.
excited they get about followers. So tell us
Right.
what you mean when you say that, and
Yeah.
why, rather than chasing leadership, you felt it was important for that, because it's kind of the theme behind the book, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, George, and I don't know if you would agree with this or not, but it seems, especially in American culture, we're trained up as kids, to be great leaders. You got to be the leader. The
Yeah.
emphasis is on leadership. You got to lead the team. You got to be the captain. You got to be the top of your class and all these things. And that's all great, and I'm not criticizing that. But what we've done, I think, over the years and maybe even decades, is we've relegated followers, the people that aren't the leader, into this kind of secondary class, also
Hmm.
rans, right? Not as important. And so what I'm trying to do with the book is say that, what, that's actually not true. Followership is actually power. Followership is actually influence in the middle. Most people, I believe, well, let's just face it, the number of followers in an organization or company or nonprofit or whatever it might be, the leaders are a very small minority of the people. The rest of us are followers, and we're all following somebody at some point. I would argue.
Yeah.
And so the point is that, like, it's not a passive role. It's not a subservient role. It's not a secondary role. It's important. It's intentional. It is power in the middle. And so what I'm trying to do in the book, and I think I make a pretty good point, is that followers are just as important as great leaders. And John Maxwell, I'm a student of John Maxwell, and
Yeah.
I gotten to work with him over the years and learn from him in person and those types of things. And he says everything rises and falls on leadership. You may have heard that said before.
Yes.
Everything
Hmm.
rises and falls on. I believe that. And if that is true, I believe that leadership rises and falls on followership. In other words, if we don't have great followers following in buying into the mission, having critical traits of a great follower, then we don't have great leaders.
Yeah, I love that, and I want to dig into a little bit of why and how you
Mm-hmm.
can be a great follower. But I think it's also important to kind of ask you, why do you think society? I get why we've kind of been led that way, but why
Mm-hmm.
does society overlook followership? And like you said, I think if you're not chasing leadership, it's almost just, well, by default you're a follower, so it's a passive type of thing. But why is
Mm-hmm.
it that it is all about leadership? Is there maybe some things you've noticed and seen as to why followership is overlooked?
Yeah, I think it's just a value system that we have. Like I said, I used the example of a little league team, and a parent wanting their kid to be a leader on the team. And I think this is the kind of the natural way that we look at things, in our society here in America, especially. And, I think that the principles that I bring out in the book are time tested. And I don't want to get in, go down the spiritual realm, but a lot of the truths in my book come from the Holy Bible. And these are time tested principles. These are stories throughout the ages that we're still talking about thousands of years later. And I feel like there's a lot of lessons, a lot of wisdom in that. And so what I've done is try to package those kinds of stories and kinds of um, uh, lessons, if you will, on how important it is to to be a follower, and how important it is if just as an example, if you'll let me go down that rabbit hole for a minute, as Jesus Christ was, forming his ministry here on earth, one of his first directives was to the first disciples. And he said, these were two guys that were fishing all night. He said, drop your nets, come follow me. He said, come follow me. That's how the movement got started, by him just saying, follow me. And so two of the greatest followers of all time did just that. They dropped their nets and said, okay, yeah. And I'm a fisherman, so I understand fishing all night and not catching anything. Yeah, I'd be like, yeah, I got to do something different, I make a little fun of that without.
I mean, let's be honest. Like, success leaves clues, right?
That's right.
There's no reason to just try to figure it out on your own.
Exactly.
These principles have continued to step up, and I think as a society, though, we just haven't noticed. And leadership has been promoted, but I think one of the reasons is, I think as a follower, a lot of conceptions people have is that you don't really have any influence. And so maybe you could talk to the idea that, how do you, maybe you could emphasize a little bit about how you become an influential follower, or that it's not a weak, passive default label, right?
Yes, exactly. It's the opposite of that. It's very active. It's very intentional. And so one of the things that I've outlined, and it's available free on the website if anybody wants to pull this down and print out a PDF. I created what I call the Humble Influence Roadmap, and how to become an effective follower. And it's basically 9 steps. The book's 14 chapters, but I've whittled it down to 9 steps. And it starts with George, and you kind of used the term a minute ago, adopting that servant mindset. It's not servant leadership, but the servant mindset. Like, how can I serve? How can I serve? And if you can kind of be thinking about that, and I don't want to get too deep into the weeds, it's all in the book and everything. Understanding the mission. How often is it that we're in a company and we just don't even understand what the mission is? Maybe it's a mission statement on the wall, but we don't, it's some esoteric, somebody in marketing came up with a slogan or something, but really understanding that. And how does that align with your heart, your purpose, the things that you want to accomplish in life? It doesn't have to be 100% lockstep, but how can you tap into something about the mission of the organization that you're in? I mean, think about that. That can be powerful just in and of itself. I create a list of key traits, for instance. Okay, I'll mention a couple of them. Obviously humility and being able to serve without necessarily needing the limelight, right? That's a follower. Something like curiosity, being curious in your role, wherever you're at in an organization, is extremely valuable. Things like courage. We don't think of courage and followership, those two words, but I'm telling you, having a heart of courage where you are willing to say, you know what, I think that we should be doing this, and being bold enough to tell the leader that you're working with or somebody on your team, hey, you've probably seen it in your own career where somebody says, well, I could have told you that wasn't going to work. Well, why didn't you tell me? I didn't have the courage, right? So having courage, being proactive, that's one of Franklin or Stephen Covey's top 7 habits, right? Is being proactive, but being proactive, thinking like, how can I add value to this relationship that I'm in a company and nonprofit, whatever. And then of course, things like effective communication are important. And then those are just a couple of the steps that I outline, but those are the kinds of things that I'm talking about when I say it's an active role that you're in. It is a powerful role. It is an influential role.
Yeah, I think that there are a lot of what you would think of as leadership characteristics that transfer right over to followership, and that you don't have to be that one person. So I think that's huge, and I do like your tie-in. We were just doing a couple episodes the other day with a gentleman that's got, a million views on his TED Talk and things. And one of the ideas is this personal mission statement. I think as a follower, when you can tie your personal mission into the corporate mission and be proactive and have influence, now you're aligning, right? Like, now you can you don't have to be the leader to do that. And yet you are a leader in your own right. But it is a mindset. And that is, I think, what all of it is: leadership, followership, and things is that. I would love for you to share, because I do think this is a great, I always try to get people to just shift the way they're thinking, because
Mm,
that is the point. Your inner world is going to create all your outer world examples.
that's right.
Maybe you could give us some examples, whether it's at a team level, an individual level, real world examples. I'm sure you have tons of stories in your book
Mm-hmm.
of just, some ways that, you might illustrate that humble influence in action. Like, do you have any, stories or examples of what you suggest to the listener?
Yeah, I think from my perspective, growing up in the media business, it was a dog eat dog world. Growing up in the 90s, coming into even in a small community, a small state that we were in, and my number one goal was like, how can I, as it spurred the book on, how can I become a more effective follower? And I
Yeah.
started looking at these examples back then, and even into the early 2000 mid 2000s, and I would always try to figure out, like, how can I best serve this person that I'm responding to. And sometimes, I've had leaders that I've worked for that have not been very good to me, but I always try to figure out a way, how could I tap into that? And I would do it anyway. I would try to figure out, what are they trying to do to get, they're asking me to do this particular role. How can I best serve them, and tap in and try to find that inner strength, something about that mission that they were on. I think it also comes down to, George. I'll share another little anecdote. Just recently, as last week, I was talking with a CEO of a tech company here in our part of the country, and it was really fascinating. I said, "What's one of the biggest challenges you're facing right now?" And he said, "Well, as a CEO, I'm pulled in a lot of different directions, and I feel like I'm an okay leader, but my people don't follow well." I was like, "Ah." And he goes, "That's
Mm,
that's what your new book's supposed to be about, right? How can I tap into that?" I said, "Well, tell me more about that." And he said, "Well, I just want them to do the work, that I tell them to do, And I said, "Well, that is who this audience is for the book, is
yeah.
your people. How can you equip them to better understand what you're trying to do? How could you, as the leader, give them a tool that can say, okay, let me learn and work on these traits that would make me a better follower? How do I know what the vision is? How, am I sharing that with them? How do I tap into their, like you just said, their personal value statement?" Right? How do I get that to happen? So those are the kinds of things that I feel like are real. I don't know if those were good examples, but those are
Yeah.
real life examples of people saying, well, leadership is hard, followership's hard, but if we can work together and have a blueprint, almost a roadmap, like I called it, I think that would be very helpful, and that's what we're trying to do.
Yeah, it's you talk about the idea of this leadership trap, and the idea
Yeah.
that whether you're a leader or an individual chasing that spotlight, I think what it does is it shifts your mindset away from what, like your title of the book, which is, humble influence, is the, counter conversation to leadership sometimes.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
for followers, there is a lot that you can do, and even as a leader, because a lot of our audience are the actual leaders,
Yes.
that humility, service mindset, and things make a difference. How did this? I'm curious, because you've been working on this book a while, but now
Hmm.
you've coming out with the book. Has your lens as a business owner changed because
Hmm.
of
Yeah.
this book and this topic? Because you've been in business a while, and maybe
Yep.
you were like me, or most, were chasing leadership and things. Has this book, it might be the chicken or the egg, right? This book has helped with that, or this is why the book came out. What has
Yep.
changed
It's
in
both.
your way of looking as a business owner based on this
Well,
topic?
yes, I think it's a great point, and man, this putting this work out there is very it's teaching me a lot about humility in and of itself. Okay, because I'm putting myself out there in a large way, and I feel like the feedback that I get from my team. Like I said, there's 15 of us on our team, and it's really interesting because I don't I try to be a leader that emboldens all these and encompasses all these traits that I'm talking about. Okay. And I'm not perfect by any means. I have my good days. I have my really bad days. But what I try to do is try to make sure that service is at my heart. I want to make sure that, realizing that living my values is extremely important, and that more is caught than taught. We know
Yeah.
that about our children, right? But when I'm out there and I'm having an interaction with a client or somebody in the community, and I'm not living up to these values that I'm talking about, that comes back on me, and then I lose credibility. And so everything that I do, I'm under the microscope, I feel. And
Yeah.
there's a lot of pressure there as a leader, but trying to equip people, here in my company, InnerAction Media, we have what's called a culture of leadership. And we talk about leadership constantly. And I remind, even somebody who maybe just out of college and, they're not leading anybody, but I say, you're leading our clients. You
Right.
could be a leader in our community. I want you to get involved with Rotary and the Chamber of Commerce and, BNI and all these different things. I want you to get involved with those things. And they see me doing it and they say, okay, yeah. And then I explain the why behind it and then try to tap into that purpose that they're trying to accomplish. A lot of these younger people, they don't necessarily know their purpose yet. I mean,
Yeah.
I didn't
And
really.
you don't need that to be
Yeah,
able to make influence, right? Yeah.
that's right. Yeah, it's absolutely right. It's a lot of it's wayfinding. You're just trying to, find your purpose in life, trying to find your role in the community. And I think, if you can create a culture where people feel valued, they feel like they can make a difference. And that's what this is all about. Is like, you don't have to have the leader role to make a difference and have an impact. You can be leading from the middle.
Yeah, I love that. And I like that term leading from the middle because I think it really is a form of leadership. How do you've spoke to this a little bit, but
Hmm.
how do you create, you've spoken on kind of an individual level of
Hmm.
influence. How do you create that culture? What are some things you've done specifically in your company
Hmm.
other than
Hmm.
encouraging them to
Hmm.
do those things to create a culture of followership and
Yeah.
and not just as a leader work on your individuals with that, but to create that as a company culture?
Yeah, if it's okay, I'll share like the hard truth about it.
Yeah.
We back in 2019, so 7 years ago or so, I learned this idea of business as ministry. I'm a person of faith and I'm a Christian, and I'm not embarrassed about that at all. And when I heard that term, business as ministry, it spoke to me, and I thought, wow. I can't necessarily go off for a year to Honduras or Ethiopia or Guatemala, but here in Morgantown, West Virginia, I could use this as my mission field, and I could take those talents and abilities that I've been blessed with my team, and we could talk about how do we use that in the marketplace. And so we do things like our Monday meeting. We start every Monday with a 9 o'clock meeting, and we have gratitudes. Everybody, all 15 of us, go around the room and we share something that we're grateful for on our hearts. And it may be something that happened last week in the company. It may be something happened over the weekend. I do a teaching. I mentioned John Maxwell. I use a devotional that he wrote several years ago, and we do a lesson on leadership. And then somebody prays over the meeting. And that's how we start each week. And they see that and then they understand, like, that's how I live my life. That's not just something for show or whatever. That's
Yeah.
me. I'm bearing my soul. I'm putting myself out there, in a big way. And so they respect that, I believe. And because they tell me that. And then, that sets the tone for how we go about doing things. We have a focus on leadership. We have a heart of generosity and a heart of gratitude.
Yeah, it's shifting the perspective and the focus, right? Because I think most people in business owners, leaders, and followers,
Hmm.
they're all chasing the success, the
Hmm.
sales, the revenue, which is all
Yep.
important stuff in business.
Yep.
But the minute you focus on gratitude or you
Hmm.
focus on something outside
Yeah.
just the KPIs of the corporate organization, you now
Yeah.
shift the mindset into something that's more of a servant, humble, focused influencer. And I think
Yeah.
that's probably a lot of ways, whether people are faith-based or not, that you
Yes.
can shift your
That's right.
mindset away from
That's
just
right.
the objective, right? The
Yeah,
goals.
exactly. Well, what you're talking about is the culture,
Yep.
George. And I, when I started down this path in 2019, I was really cynical about it and skeptical. And I was like, I don't know. I mean, yeah, culture, let's go, culture. But I committed to it. And over a couple of months, I started seeing the results of it, and then I went all in. And in 2019, we had this mind shift, doubled the company. Then the COVID hit and everything, and our company just took off. And we've since that time, we've doubled in revenue top line, and this year we're going to double again. I mean,
Wow. Yeah.
there's something to it. And I'm not like taking any credit for that at all.
No,
Zero.
it's culture. Culture leads to a team effort, right? And it's one of the
Yeah.
reasons I'm so big on
Yeah.
the power of the mastermind, because
Exactly,
when
man.
two or more people are working in the spirit of harmony to a common objective, and that's
Yeah.
outside just success,
Yeah.
there's a leverageable, influential effect to that,
Yeah.
and it
Yeah.
can only be done, in my opinion, through servant leadership,
That's right. That's right.
humility, right?
Yeah, yeah. Napoleon Hill had something going there in 1943 or whenever he wrote that line, right? I
These
mean,
dang success principles keep showing up. I don't know what's going on with that, but
you think about that, even that book. I mean, those are
yeah,
foundational truths that don't waver,
yeah,
honestly.
yeah.
And he was right. And so I feel like I, you know, I mentioned, these leadership books and all the material that's been written. So, I mean, it's just regurgitated, right? And to some degree, that's what humble influence is about too. It's just, I've taken these principles and just, like you said, flip the script. I like the way you said
Yeah.
that, because that's
Yeah.
exactly what it is. And they're intertwined, and like I said, you can't have great leaders unless you have great followers.
Yeah, and I think what I'm learning over the years, I'm getting a little older. I'm starting to, my kids at least tell me so. I'm realizing that there you can learn and you can grow and you can constantly challenge yourself and get outside your comfort zone, but it's
Hmm.
always going to come back to a combination of self-awareness and
Hmm.
self introspection, right? Like,
Mm.
how am I creating impact? How am I creating legacy, making a difference? Because ultimately, we all want to feel like, and we're looking for those emotions, not the things,
Hmm.
emotions, but we want to feel like we're making a difference. And so, this whole topic
Hmm.
of influence and humble influence and leadership influence and things, I think, is so important, but it does
Hmm.
begin internally. So,
Yes, sir.
we're
That's
kind
right.
of getting to the end of our time. I just want to leave with a question like this.
Yep.
What would you recommend? What would you direct? What would you say to
Mm.
people that are listening to this to say, okay, what should I do? Like, where should I start with this? And how do I begin to, implement this idea of humble influence? Where do they start?
Yeah, I mean, one of the easiest things, I have that free download. I just go to the website and download the Humble Influence Roadmap. I think it's pretty neat. It's kind of intuitive, but it's spells out 9 steps for folks. I also think that the idea of stay humble, that's my hashtag, stay humble, because I feel like that's a reminder for me every day. It's very easy to take credit for things, but it's also very difficult to take the responsibility and the blame when things go wrong. So staying humble, I think, puts you in that neutral position where you could just be like, okay, I can have empathy for my team. I can lead with courage. I have conviction. I have a passion. I want to make sure that my people are equipped, that they have the tools to do their job, and just from a humble influence standpoint, just realizing that leadership is influence and influence is leadership. And so that's what I'm kind of getting at, is like, I think there's a humility there, and there's a responsibility to lead with a sense of humble influence.
Yeah, I love it. That's a great, great, great message. And you said it earlier, and I always like to point things back out to our listeners,
Hmm.
because you start your meetings with gratitude. And I think
Hmm.
an easy road, safe road to immediately get to humility is gratitude, because
Yeah.
gratitude is going to shift you from, you to outside. And
Yes,
so humble
exactly.
leadership and humble influence, I think, is a great topic in today's world, where it's all about being the spotlight and everything else.
Yeah.
What the biggest thing I've learned from kind of what your message is this: you can be an influence and a leader with humility, and you
Yeah.
don't have to be that hard charging, title toting, leader type of deal. So there is
Yeah.
influence, there is impact, there is legacy
Yeah.
from that. So I really appreciate your messages on the episode
Yeah.
today. Where's the best place for them to connect with you? It's probably your website, right? I can put these
Yeah.
links in our show notes as well, but
Yeah,
what's the best way to?
that'd be great. For the book, it's humbleinfluencebook.com, and my company's InnerActionMedia.com.
Perfect. Yeah, I'm going to add that to our show notes, and might even try to get you back into our Academy Mastermind, just to get some
Awesome.
deep dive topics. But
I love it.
listen, guys, I appreciate you joining us today. the power of the mastermind is real. I mean, when you collaborate with people that think differently, like Jim and the success he's had, I think you're gonna make changes in your life. So do me a favor and share the show, and just remember, no matter where you're at, whether you're crushing your goals or you're dealing with things, it's never too late to start creating that life that you're meant to live, the one that you want to live. So take action. Go check out the free download and stuff that Jim's got, and look forward to talking with you more. Hit me up on the Daily Mastermind, and we'll talk with you again tomorrow. Have a great day.